The ocean was their battlefield, vast, dark, and silent. To the men of the German U-boat fleet, the sea was both a shield and a weapon. In the early years of World War II, when the Allies still scrambled to understand the scale of the threat, the U-boats moved unseen beneath the waves, their periscopes cutting through the cold Atlantic swells like the eyes of predators. The British called it the Battle of the Atlantic. The Germans called it Der U-Boot-Krieg, the U-boat war. But to the sailors who fought it, it was something far more personal. It was survival in the blackest depths of the earth. In 1939, the Kriegsmarine unleashed a new kind of warfare, silent, patient, and merciless. Operating in packs of 5 to 10 submarines, the Grey Wolves prowled the shipping lanes stretching from Newfoundland to Gibraltar. Convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons to Britain became their prey. Each sinking was a victory, each plume of smoke on the horizon proof that Germany could choke the lifeline of the British Empire without ever setting foot on its shores. The early success was staggering. In 1940 and 1941, U-boat commanders like Otto Kretschmer, Günther Prien, and Joachim Schepke became national heroes. Their names broadcast across Germany, their faces on propaganda posters, their tonnage tallies spoken with pride by a nation at war. They called it the happy time. The Atlantic belonged to them, and it was easy to see why. The ocean, endless and unforgiving, was a perfect ally. The technology of the time made it almost impossible to detect submarines once they submerged. The British had sonar, or ASDIC, but it was crude, unreliable, and useless when U-boats attacked from the surface under cover of night. Merchant ships had no defenses, and even the escorting destroyers were too few and too slow to stop the slaughter. For the men inside the U-boats, it felt like invincibility. Each dive beneath the waves was an escape into another world, one of steel walls, diesel fumes, and constant vibration. The crews worked in silence, listening to the hum of the engines and the steady drip of condensation. They lived in darkness for weeks, cramped into narrow corridors where the air turned thick with sweat and oil. Yet they believed in their mission and in their invisibility. Above them, convoys burned in the night, ships split in half by torpedoes, cargo sinking to the abyss, survivors clinging to wreckage in freezing water. Every attack was swift, precise, and unseen. From periscope depth, the U-boat captains watched their victims die without a sound. Then they slipped away, vanishing beneath the waves before the escorts even knew where to fire. It was a new kind of war, a war fought in silence. The Allied sailors called the submarines sea ghosts. To them, death came without warning, a single flash, a thunderous explosion, then darkness and cold. But beneath the surface, the hunters carried their own fears. Every dive brought the risk of mechanical failure, every depth charge a reminder of the ocean's crushing weight. The pressure at 200 meters could tear steel apart like paper. When the hull creaked, every man aboard felt it in his bones. But still they believed. The enemy could not see them. For a time, that was true. The Atlantic became a graveyard, and the Allies, desperate, blind, and bleeding ships faster than they could replace them, seemed powerless to stop it. Churchill himself would later write, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." But what the Germans didn't know, what they couldn't yet imagine, was that deep within British laboratories, scientists and engineers were building something that would end their dominance forever. They were crafting a weapon that could pierce the ocean's darkness. Soon, the hunters would become the hunted, and the sound that would seal their fate wasn't the roar of a bomb or the crash of a torpedo. It was the sharp, cold ping of sonar, echoing through the deep. By late 1942, the Atlantic was no longer the silent graveyard it had been. The U-boats still prowled, but something had changed. The hunters began to feel hunted. The Germans didn't know it yet, but the Allies had turned the tide, not with brute force, but with technology, coordination, and sheer determination. The turning point came quietly, deep inside Britain's intelligence and research centers. In underground bunkers and makeshift labs, scientists and engineers worked day and night to find a way to see through the darkness of the sea. What they produced would forever change naval warfare. SONAR, the Sound Navigation and Ranging System. Unlike the primitive ASDIC of 1939, the new sonar was precise, reliable, and deadly. Allied destroyers could now send out sound waves that bounced off the steel hulls of submarines, revealing their position like echoes in a cavern. No longer invisible, the U-boats found the ocean shrinking around them. What once was a limitless, safe hunting ground became a maze filled with invisible eyes. But sonar was just the beginning. The Allies also began using HF/DF, high-frequency direction finding, a system that detected the radio transmissions U-boats sent when coordinating attacks. Each time a German commander reported his position or tonnage, he unknowingly gave away his location. Within hours, Allied aircraft and destroyers could be on top of him. Then came the airplanes. Long-range bombers equipped with radar, a new British invention, began patrolling the Atlantic day and night. Before, U-boats were safe on the surface, using the night to recharge batteries and attack convoys unseen. Now, radar made darkness their enemy. Even on moonless nights, Allied aircraft could spot the faint outline of a periscope or the shimmer of a conning tower on the black water. For the first time, U-boat crews began to fear the surface. They were forced to dive deeper, stay submerged longer, and move slower, cutting their effectiveness drastically. The once proud gray wolves were reduced to desperate scavengers, hiding from the very prey they had once devoured with ease. Convoys, too, became stronger. What had once been disorganized groups of merchant ships now moved in tight formations, protected by destroyers, corvettes, and frigates armed with sonar, depth charges, and hedgehogs, forward-firing anti-submarine weapons that exploded only on contact. When sonar found a U-boat, the ocean erupted. Destroyers would drop patterns of depth charges, dozens at a time, creating walls of pressure that could crush a submarine's hull or drive it to the surface. Inside the U-boats, men were thrown from their bunks, lights flickered, and pipes burst as the hull groaned under the crushing force. The Germans soon realized this was no longer the same ocean they had once ruled. They were being stalked relentlessly, tracked from the air, cornered by sonar, and pounded by weapons they couldn't see or counter. For every Allied ship sunk, 2 or 3 U-boats were now being destroyed. By early 1943, the tide had fully turned. The Allies had broken Enigma, Germany's vaunted code system, allowing them to read U-boat communications almost in real time. Every new wolfpack was ambushed before it even reached its prey. And yet, the U-boat crews kept fighting. They dove into the freezing depths, fired torpedoes at massive convoys, and died in silence beneath the waves. Their losses were catastrophic. In 1943 alone, the Kriegsmarine lost over 250 U-boats, nearly 1 a day. The Atlantic, once their greatest weapon, had become their grave. By the end of the year, the message was clear. The Allies now ruled the seas. The sonar ping, that once ignored sound echoing through the depths, had become the sound of death for the German submarine fleet. For the men who once laughed at the idea of being detected underwater, the realization came too late. The age of the invisible hunter was over. It's the spring of 1943. Somewhere in the cold, black waters of the North Atlantic, U-223 cuts through the depths, silent, unseen, and confident. The commander, Kapitän Lieutenant Karl Jürgens, believes his crew is invincible. They've sunk 6 Allied freighters in 2 months and escaped unscathed. To them, sonar is nothing more than Allied propaganda, a trick to scare the weak. But that night, the myth of invincibility dies. U-223 surfaces to recharge batteries, its diesel engines roaring softly in the wind. The sea is calm, the stars bright. The men breathe fresh air for the first time in hours. Cigarettes glow in the darkness. Then, from the west, comes the faint hum of engines. The crew barely notices. They've heard aircraft before. They always dive in time. But this time, the radar sees them first. High above, a British Wellington bomber equipped with lee light and radar locks onto the faint reflection of the submarine's conning tower. The pilot flips a switch. A blinding white beam erupts from the belly of the aircraft, cutting through the night like daylight. Alarm! D-I-V-E! 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 Chaos erupts. Men scramble to hatches, engines roar to life. The submarine plunges beneath the surface just as the first depth charges hit the water. The explosions hammer the hull, shaking the steel tube like a tin can. Inside, gauges rattle, lights flicker, and men are thrown from their posts. Sonar pings echo through the black water. Steady, mechanical, merciless. The destroyer above, part of an Allied convoy escort, has locked onto their position. It circles slowly, listening, waiting for the right moment. Then, another barrage. Boom! 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 The blasts tear through the depths. Pipes burst. The lights die. The air fills with smoke and oil. The U-boat's hull groans like a dying animal. Water sprays from the seams. Jürgens knows what it means. They've been found by sonar. The thing they laughed at is now the sound of death. For hours, the destroyer plays a cruel game. Each time U-223 tries to rise or change course, another pattern of depth charges slams down. The sound of the sonar ping grows louder, faster, closer. The men whisper prayers. Some vomit. Some cry silently in the dark. The air grows hot, thick, and toxic. Oxygen runs low. Finally, Jürgens orders silence. Engines off. Total stillness. They drift in the darkness, hoping the Allies lose contact. For a few minutes, the sonar fades. Then, a single sharp ping echoes again. The destroyer has found them. The final attack begins. The sea explodes with a dozen charges. One detonates near the stern. The rudder shatters. Another crushes the forward ballast tank. Seawater floods in. The U-boat tilts nose down, sinking fast. At 220 meters, the pressure begins to deform the hull. Bolts pop. The steel creaks like it's crying. The men know what comes next. There's no escape. Jürgens looks at his crew, young faces pale under the red emergency light. He whispers, "Es war eine Ehre." It was an honor. Moments later, the ocean swallows them whole. Above, the British destroyer sees an oil slick rising. The sonar pings fade. Another U-boat has fallen. Another invisible hunter destroyed by the weapons they once mocked. And that was not just one story. That was the fate of hundreds. Each one thought they were the predator, until sonar turned them into prey. By the end of the war, nearly 75% of German submarine crews were dead. For every 100 men who went to sea, only 30 came home. The rest still lie beneath the Atlantic, in cold, silent graves of twisted steel. The men who once laughed at Sonar never laughed again. By mid-1943, the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic had shifted irreversibly. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm, once the terror of Allied shipping lanes, was bleeding out beneath the waves. Every patrol now felt like a death sentence. The Allies had transformed the ocean into a battlefield of sensors, signals, and steel. The quiet expanse that once shielded the U-boats now betrayed them at every turn. Sonar, ASDIC, had evolved into a deadly art. Destroyer crews could now detect even the faintest echo of a submarine's hull hundreds of meters below. Every ping wasn't just a sound, it was a death knell. At the same time, the Allies had achieved complete aerial dominance over the Atlantic. The very long-range VLR Liberators, fitted with radar and depth charges, closed what was once called the Mid-Atlantic Gap, the stretch of ocean where no aircraft could reach. Suddenly, there was no safe zone left for the U-boats. They were hunted from the Bay of Biscay to the coast of Greenland. In a desperate attempt to regain the initiative, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, ordered the deployment of new wolfpacks, massive coordinated attacks involving dozens of submarines converging on Allied convoys. But the strategy that had once brought the British Empire to its knees now only hastened Germany's collapse. The Allied HF/DF, High-Frequency Direction Finding System, nicknamed Huff-Duff, intercepted every radio transmission the U-boats made to coordinate attacks. What Dönitz didn't realize was that his submarines were effectively broadcasting their own positions to the enemy. Convoys that once fell victim to surprise torpedo strikes were now moving fortresses, protected by destroyer escorts, radar-equipped corvettes, and air cover that never rested. The red line on Allied tracking maps, the known U-boat positions, grew shorter by the week. U-boats that dared to surface to recharge batteries were instantly detected by radar-equipped patrol aircraft. The moment they broke through the waves, searchlights cut the sky, and depth charges followed within seconds. Those that tried to remain submerged suffocated under the crushing pressure and stale air, unable to fight back. Inside the cramped hulls, morale shattered. Crews were exhausted, terrified, and trapped in an endless cycle of survival and death. The once proud wolves of the Atlantic were now cornered animals, hunted relentlessly by machines that never slept. Letters home went unanswered. Friends who left port never returned. The Allied technological leap was staggering. Sonar operators became as feared as gunners. Pilots flying coastal command aircraft learned to time their attacks perfectly, dropping patterns of depth charges calibrated to explode at precise depths, tearing submarines apart with hydraulic shock waves. Even when a U-boat escaped, it was only a matter of time before it was found again. The Allies had turned information into a weapon. The sea had become a grid. Every frequency, every echo, every blip on a radar screen, a potential kill. By May 1943, the numbers told the story. In a single month, Germany lost 41 U-boats. Entire wolfpacks vanished without a trace. Dönitz, once confident that his submarines could starve Britain into surrender, was forced to withdraw his fleet from the Atlantic entirely. The U-boat campaign, the backbone of Hitler's naval strategy, was dead. And yet, for the men who had survived, there was no triumph, only silence. The U-boat pens in Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire were now ghost ports. The walls that had once echoed with victory chants now heard only the slow drip of seawater and the footsteps of men who knew they had lost the ocean. The age of the submarine predator was over. The Atlantic, once Germany's hunting ground, now belonged to sonar, radar, and relentless Allied ingenuity. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic had left behind an invisible graveyard, a vast expanse of ocean littered with the twisted remains of hundreds of submarines and the bones of nearly 30,000 German sailors. It was, statistically, one of the most lethal assignments in the entire war. For the men of the U-boat fleet, survival was an exception, not the rule. Of the 1,155 U-boats built by Nazi Germany, 785 were lost, many with all hands. Each wreck still lies beneath the Atlantic, resting in total darkness. Cold tombs sealed by pressure, guarded by silence. The crews who once called the ocean their ally now sleep forever in the same depths they believed made them invincible. The survivors who returned to Germany did not come home to glory. They came home to ruins. Cities like Hamburg and Bremen, once proud shipyards of the Kriegsmarine, were now flattened wastelands. The men who had spent years fighting unseen battles beneath the waves emerged into a country that no longer existed. For them, the war was over, but the sound of sonar, that sharp, metallic ping, would echo in their memories forever. The Allies, meanwhile, had learned lessons that would shape warfare for generations. The Battle of the Atlantic became the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare. The sonar that hunted U-boats evolved into the powerful systems used during the Cold War, when NATO navies tracked Soviet submarines beneath the Arctic ice. The technological race that had begun with simple underwater pings now extended into a global network of sensors, sonar buoys, and nuclear-powered submarines, all born from the desperate struggle against the gray wolves of the Atlantic. For the engineers, scientists, and sailors who fought in that unseen war, the victory was not just in tonnage or numbers. It was proof that technology and cooperation could overcome even the deadliest threats. The Allies had turned an existential crisis, the near starvation of Britain, into a triumph of innovation. Radar, sonar, cryptography, and air power had fused into one seamless machine of survival. And yet, beneath the triumph lay tragedy. Every ship sunk, every submarine lost, every sailor swallowed by the ocean was a life erased. A son, a husband, a father. The war beneath the sea was fought without witnesses, and its victories came at terrible cost. Today, the wrecks still lie quietly across the seafloor. From the icy waters near Iceland to the deep trenches of the Bay of Biscay. They are monuments not of conquest, but of sacrifice. Marine archaeologists who explore them speak of eerie stillness, tables still set for dinner, uniforms still hanging in lockers, and the faint outlines of lives frozen in time. The Battle of the Atlantic was not just a struggle for dominance, it was the test of endurance for an entire generation. It proved that no weapon, no matter how advanced or invisible, could escape the relentless evolution of war. The German U-boat force began the conflict as the hunter. It ended it as the hunted. And in their fall, they taught the world that the sea, like war itself, spares no one. If you were moved by this story of courage, innovation, and tragedy beneath the waves, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to WWII Heroes Legends, because here, the real battles of history are never forgotten, and the echoes of their bravery will always rise from the depths